Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution.
Reverend Wendy presents a talk that explores and expresses the truths of unity, and that there are real-world practical things that we can do to deepen our experience of spirituality and help us in our daily lives.
So, radically inclusive. The last few weeks we've been taking a look at who and what we are as a spiritual community, that we are called together to be about our individual work, individually transforming our lives and providing tools and opportunities and teaching to do that, and then collectively and individually called to be about the larger work, the work of working together to heal our world with love. And we've looked at some of the ways we actually attempt to do that. That is the what. Transforming lives, healing our world is the what, but how do we do that? And we've talked about two key ideas. I want to talk about the third one today. And those ideas being that we are spiritually progressive. That has to do with what our teaching is and what our philosophy is, what underpins all of our concepts and core beliefs and values. And then we talked about the idea of being socially responsive, being engaged with our spirituality around real issues in the world, no matter what those issues are, to be willing to look at what is the intersection between what we attempt to practice, what we say we believe within our spiritual teaching, our spiritual theology, and what is the intersection of that with the real issues in the world, and how do we show up around those. And today I want to talk to you about the third, and that is that we are radically inclusive. Say that with me. Radically inclusive. Radically inclusive. Radically inclusive means that we leave no one out. No one out. No one out. No one out. Radically inclusive. I heard this quote a number of years ago at one of our Unity conventions, and I love it. And to me, it is this idea of what being radically inclusive looks like and actually feels like. It's the difference between being invited to the party and being invited to dance. Do you get the difference there? You can invite somebody to the party, but man, when you invite them to dance with you, what are you doing? You're inviting them to come closer, right? You're opening yourself up. You're stepping into their world or inviting them into your world. To me, that is being radically inclusive, taking that next step. So I have 3 questions that I'm going to ask you to think about today and hopefully beyond just today. And the questions kind of build upon themselves and go a little deeper with each question. The first question is this: will you practice drawing your circle wider? Will you practice drawing your circle wider? That question comes out of a book I wrote called Ask Yourself This, and the book was based on or built around a whole bunch of questions. And I want to read to you the story that I included in this question. Are you willing to practice drawing your circle wider? So this is a story that happened during World War I. A Protestant chaplain was assigned to the American troops in Italy. While there, he became close friends with a local priest. Later, the chaplain and his troops were relocated, and soon afterwards, the chaplain was killed. Upon hearing of his friend's death, the priest petitioned the military and requested that the chaplain be buried in his parish cemetery, explaining that they had been close friends. Since the chaplain had no other family, the request was granted. But when the priest asked permission from the Catholic Church, it was denied, because the chaplain wasn't Catholic. Disappointed, the priest, not wanting to risk losing his parish, yet wanting his friend's grave close by, buried the chaplain just outside the cemetery's fence. A few years later, one of the chaplain's troop members returned. Wanting to pay his respects to the chaplain, he asked the priest if he could see the gravesite. The priest led the man to the place where the chaplain had been buried, and the man was astonished to see that the chaplain's grave lay within the cemetery's fence. Amazed and elated, he said, "I don't believe it. I see you finally got permission to bury the chaplain in the cemetery." "No, not exactly," the priest smiled. "They told me where I couldn't bury the body, but they never said I couldn't move the fence." I love that priest. I love that kind of way of being and thinking and getting around whatever you have to get around, if you have to get around it, to really live out from the higher thought and the higher purpose and the higher calling. And certainly being radically inclusive is one of those higher callings for every single one of us. I think it might be fair to say that no matter how much personal growth we have done individually, that I bet there are still places where we need to move our own fences, where we need to draw our circle wider. I think it's important and deeply self-reflective to ask ourselves, who or what are we shutting out? Who or what are we shutting out? Where are we shutting them out? Where does our heart shut down? The spiritual journey is a journey of staying present to whatever is, while never losing sight that if what is present is harmful or hurtful or negative, that we hold the light for what is possible, that we stay present, we don't turn away from it, but that we also always keep our mind clear and our heart open, that we do not shut down, that we stay engaged not just mentally, but we stay engaged with a compassionate heart. I like this piece of a poem from Edwin Markham. The poem is called Outwitted. "He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." We drew a circle that took him in. So are you willing to draw your circle wider? Are you willing to move your fence just a little bit? And maybe one day we won't have the fences at all. Second question, are you willing to ask yourself, who is missing from your circle of friends? Are you willing to ask yourself, who is missing from your circle of friends? As the Boulder Together ministers and I got together in one of our monthly sessions last year, an exercise was shared with me in which you write down, you think about the 10 or 12 people that you trust the most. And you're not supposed to overthink it a whole lot, and if you don't have 10 or 12, that's okay. But you're to think about who are the people that you absolutely, positively trust the most. And then after you make that list, there are a series of other questions where you're supposed to check off something about those people that you've just listed. And the kinds of things that you are to check off are the kinds of ways we tend to separate from one another or we tend to marginalize from one another. And the purpose of the exercise is for us to really see just how genuinely inclusive we are. In other words, are we just tolerating and thinking nice thoughts about people who are different than us, or do we actually have in our circle of friends people that represent a very wide cross-section of the beauty and diversity of the human family? And so this exercise touched upon how many in our circle do we have of people that are very different than we are. If you're straight, how many gay and lesbian friends do you have in your circle of friends? And for each of these that I'm going to ask you, obviously you flip them around the other way. If you're gay or a lesbian, how many close straight friends do you have in your circle? If you're a Democrat, how many Republican friends do you have in your circle? If you're a Republican, how many? See how the laughter just kind of went across the room? If we can't do it here with the teaching that we hold, how would we ever expect it to really happen outside of this kind of teaching? And so do we have friends in our circle that politically are very different than we are? And do we invite them to dance? And vice versa. If you're white, how many friends of color do you have? If you're a person of color, how many white friends do you have? Not just people you know, but actually friends. And if you're a white person and you have a person of color that is in your circle as a friend, I want to give you a homework assignment. And that homework assignment is this: if you have never, as the white person in that friendship, if you have never opened the topic of racism with your friend of color, I encourage you to do that, because that takes a friendship to a whole other level. Do you know why? Let me tell you why. Because for almost all of us, well, for all of us as white people, those of us who are white, don't have to think about being white. We're just white. We're part of the dominant society. But I promise you this, every single person of color thinks about race, because every single person of color deals with it every single day. Just like every single person that's marginalized because of their sexual orientation, they think about and deal with that every single day. It's gotten better on both of these fronts, but it's still not what it needs to be. And so this idea of, are you willing to ask yourself, who is missing from your circle of friends? If you're a skier, how many snowboarders are in your circle of friends? I wanted to lighten it up a little bit. Some of the weirdest thoughts come to me right before our meditation time, and having just come back from the mountains for a few days of skiing, and I am a skier, and I need to practice more radical inclusion of snowboarders. Because just like Democrats and Republicans right now don't seem to be getting along at all well, skiers and snowboarders kind of have the same thing going on. If you're physically able, do you have any friends in your circle that are physically challenged? Unity hasn't had a perfect history or a perfect past with some of these things. It's interesting to me, in some ways, Unity as a movement, we're about 150 years old, Unity as a movement was one of the first, if not the first, to perform holy unions long before Marriage Equality Act, obviously, but willingly performed holy unions. I can remember as a ministerial student, I'm in my 38th year now. No, I'm in my 39th year as a minister. So 41 years ago, when I was in ministerial school, that's a long time ago. I know it's a long time ago. I don't know how it happened, but it just happened. But I can remember in our seminary classes having conversations about doing holy unions. Isn't that radical? I mean, that was 4 decades ago. Our past, though, around racism wasn't quite so good. And yet, as a movement, we have begun in the last few years to try to clean up our act. Not just to go forward and kind of go, oh, sorry, we did some of that stuff, and not get into the muck and mire where you have to kind of sit back and say, what were we really doing? And where do we really need to make amends? Where do we need to own the wrong that we did and see how we can heal that so we can really, truly go forward? But this is true of us as individuals as well. And one place to go deeper is to look within our circle of friends. Who is included in there? And what can we do? If everybody in your circle of friends is kind of just like you and I aren't doing a very good job then. We're not doing a very good job of living in the realm of inclusivity. And the third question is this: will you stretch yourself even more to not only leave no one out, but can you begin to stretch into caring for the very ones you might be tempted to leave out? Can you keep a part of your heart, a part of your mind open to a willingness to stretch beyond just not leaving anyone out, but really beginning to care for the very one that maybe you left out before? Let me ask you a quick question here. How many of you, because many of you in this room are around my age, some younger, some older, how many of you would say that you feel you have personally made more progress in your than the family of origin you came from around the ideas of inclusion and letting go of bias and racism and so forth? I agree. I think that's probably true for lots of us. And one of the things that's happened in the White Allies meetings that I've been holding and in the Brave Conversation meetings I've held is how many times we share stories about the things that we grew up with, the subtle ways of marginalizing people or discriminating against people, and how we're aware of those tapes or those messages playing in our mind, and we're consciously working to override them. Nod your head if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I can remember the very first boy I had a crush on in high school was Japanese American, and when I brought him home, after he left, sorry, Mom, but I'm going to be truthful here. She didn't even know what she was doing, but she looked at me and she said, "You do know he's Oriental, right?" And I don't think I had even really thought about it. I just thought he was really cute. And he liked me and I liked him. And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess so. So what?" So, but she didn't even know. She didn't even know. But you and I do, right? But we're not done yet is the whole point. And part of recognizing that we're not done is being willing to go deeper into some of these issues and being willing to put our spiritual understanding and insight beneath them and show up differently. So will you stretch beyond just not leaving anyone out to beginning to care more for those that maybe at one time you would have left out? And I want to end with one of my favorite parables. It's a parable of the Good Samaritan. How many of you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, maybe from Sunday school or something? I want to give you a little bit of context first before I jump into and read you the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan. So it's a parable that Jesus gives in response. He gives this parable, he gives this story in response to someone who is trying to trick him. The person who was trying to trick him was an expert in the law, in the Mosaic law. And this expert in the Mosaic law asked Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, Jesus knew that the guy was an expert in the Mosaic law, and so Jesus knew that this man would know what Moses' law had said. And so Jesus says to this person, "What is written in the Mosaic law?" And the expert says, "Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And I can imagine Jesus just simply say, "Yep, you got it, go do that." And so he did say something like that. And the expert in the law, looking for the cosmic loophole, says, "But who is my neighbor?" Doesn't that just sound like the kind of thing this expert would do? But who is my neighbor? And then Jesus gives this. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side too. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, a small amount of money, and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. What is significant about this story is it's significant because the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. So to say that it was a Jew that went and took care of him is to say he moved his fence, he drew his circle wider, he left no one out, and not only did he not leave anyone out, he cared for the very one that others turned their back on. So as we think about what it means to be students of unity or practical Christians or mystics or metaphysicians or students of the science of mind, as we think about what it means to be that, it's more than just all the meaningful classes that we take that help us to understand and learn what the teachings and the principles and the practices are. It's actually to then live our lives informed by them in the nitty-gritty arena of our lives, in the messy places of our lives, to not leave that behind, but to actually make that be front and center. And so I want to close with the 3 questions and with the quote. Will you practice drawing your circle wider? Will you practice drawing your circle wider? Are you willing to look at who is missing from your circle of friends? And will you stretch even more to actually care for the very ones that you might be tempted to leave out? Remembering that being radically inclusive is not just inviting someone to the party, but it's asking them to dance. Namaste.
Many people enjoy Reverend Wendy's talks and meditations and aren't able to attend the Unity Center in person. If you're part of our extended family from around the world and would like to help support the Unity Center, please go to our website or download our free app, which offers even more ways to connect with the Unity Center. Namaste.